At the Okoli Law Group, we specialize in producing justice. If you or a loved one in the Atlanta metro area is facing serious criminal charges, then you need serious legal representation.
The Okoli Law Group is here for you. The Okoli Law Group is here for us.
The Okoli Law Group, serious legal representation.
Peace, fam. We are live again. Dynasty Mirror, search for Uhuru. Thank you all. Thank you so much for joining. Please do me a favor. Hit that like button again. Please hit that like button. Also, make sure you share and make sure you subscribe. Got a couple of announcements. Sierra Leone is back on. Again, Sierra Leone is back on for citizenship. They've changed the rules some, so you have to come twice now. And then also, too, they're accepting more than just African ancestry. Sorry about that. I got to change these notifications where they don't come in through my laptop. I apologize. So let me text this person. Please text. So yeah, Sierra Leone citizenship is back on. You have to come twice now. Also, they're accepting more results, so they're not only accepting African ancestry like the past. So Ancestry.com, 23andMe, and CRI in 23andMe actually went bankrupt. But if you still have the results, you're eligible. So please visit donafo.africa. Again, please visit donafo.africa to learn more. I am hosting a group this month. We're already in April. Goodness, we're already in April. So I'm hosting a group this month, and then I will be taking another group in December. But outside of that, we're rolling to Senegal in May for the Jazz Festival, Nigeria in August for the Oshun Festival, Zanzibar in September for Safari Blue, Namibia and South Africa in November, then back to Sierra Leone in December. If you're interested, please visit donfo.africa. And also, show the documentary some love. Show the documentary some love. My documentary. So when you go to donfo.africa, click on documentary and buy the documentary in search of Uhuru. So make sure you guys go and buy the documentary as well. Without further ado, we're going to bring up our brother, Ebube, Okoli. And today's topic, does USAID fuel corruption in Africa? Are the people who are supposed to be benefiting from USAID, are they really benefiting from it? Or is it just the NGOs and politicians? And a sister, her name is Maguette Wade, I believe her name is. She's Senegalese. And she made a great point about USAID, and this was a great observation. And I noticed this: all of these NGOs that benefit from USAID, they're all located in rich, high-end areas. They all got brand new. They get all the brand new Land Cruiser, Toyota Highlanders, and the Land Rover Destroyers. But when you ask them, like, what do you do? Like, what actually do you do? I swear it's the most vague. We're just observing the nature of the butterflies that come in and their migration patterns throughout West Africa. I mean, like, that's what it is. So I'm gonna bring Ebube on. And Ebube, let me pull up the sides, but go ahead and introduce yourself. Oops.
Salutations. It's good to be back. Good to be home. How's everything going, Dynasty?
No, all is well. Can't complain.
It's perfect. For those who don't know me, my name is Attorney Ebube Okoli. I'm a Nigerian-born, American-trained attorney and geopolitical analyst. I'm also the president and senior partner of the Okoli Law Group. That's a law group or a law firm here based in Atlanta. And also, too, Dynasty, I got a gift for you. I got these shiny new mugs with my logo on it. They just came in, so I got one of these for you. Let me know when you got a chance. I'm going to bring it over to you. So,
hey,
nice
bring
black
it over.
handle.
Yeah,
you like it, the coffee tastes better out of it anyway.
Okay, okay.
So it's going to be an interesting one today. It's going to be definitely an interesting one today.
Now I'm getting slides ready right now. They're loading.
Perfect.
Well,
It's been quite some time now that you've been moving, man. I like that. I like to see when you're really into it.
Listen, I'm just trying to stay busy like you, man. You know, I'm just trying to stay busy like you.
I got a couple homicide cases I'm working on currently. Those really take a lot of my time up.
Hey, we need to do a separate show on this. If you're a lawyer, but a little sidebar. Have you been keeping up with the Big U situation?
Oh yeah, we have to do something on that. And also, allegedly, little baby might have some RICO charges coming here in Atlanta. That's what the DA is saying.
Is the DA actually saying that, or is that just the internet?
That's just the rumors. That's the rumors. They're saying that the DA is saying that. So the DA is the real question. But hopefully the brother doesn't have any RICO charges. But the way they're throwing around these RICO charges like candy, it wouldn't surprise me. I'm just hoping not, because I'm handling a couple RICO charges myself. Those are very difficult. They're very complex, very intricate. They take up so much time because you have to understand the entire complexity of everything and everyone involved. It's like you're trying 50 cases in.
Right, but go ahead, Ebube. We got the slides up. Or let me see if I could
go ahead and get it into presentation mode.
Hold on, presentation. Come on, Dynas. Come on, you done this before, Dynas. Act like we've been here before. Dynas. Hold on. Okay, here we go. View. There we go. Bam.
All right. So let's go ahead and get into it. Now, in regards to, there's no one who doesn't know this by now. I believe everybody knows that Donald Trump won the election. He actually won in almost like a landslide election. Of course, he's a polarizing figure. And one thing we have to remember is that I think when it's all said and done, Donald Trump is going to be remembered for his unique style. So we had the Jacksonians, we had the Jeffersonians, we had the Whigs, we had the Federalists, the Anti-Federalists. I think that Trump, due to his unorthodox approach to doing many things, is going to create his own political ideology. I believe it's going to be called Trumpism.
Well, if I can interject, sorry to interrupt. This is the Trump party that's in power now. It's not the Republican Party, if you ask me, but go ahead.
Well, here's the thing about political parties. You have to look at them like basketball teams. So, for example, if you look at the Lakers, there was a time that Shaq had the Lakers, then Kobe had the Lakers, and then LeBron had the Lakers, and now it looks like Luka has the Lakers. They're still the same Lakers. It's just they're different factions and groups that control that sports team, if you will. Or it's like college football teams under a different coach. You know, K-State, you had Snyder. He did it differently. You had Beamer and Virginia Tech. Sometimes you have a coach that comes with such a unique style. For example, Salem High School, you had Coach Beatty, who's now in the NFL. But so right now, Trump's faction in the political party is different from the neoconservatives. I'm gonna get into a little bit of that because that's really dictating how a lot of these things are going to be happening. So Trump is in power, and the 100 days has basically come and gone, and there's been a lot of motion, and there's been a lot of things to discuss in regards to the African continent. Let's go ahead and go to the next slide. So another potential polarizing figure is Elon Musk, so much so that people are now burning Teslas and firebombing and scratching Teslas, which isn't a smart thing to do because those Teslas have a lot of cameras. So if you're going to commit a crime, just don't do it on camera or don't commit the crime at all. But Donald Trump has linked up with Elon Musk. And Elon Musk, of course, has the Doge, and it's the Department of Government Efficiency. And they're basically going through with a fine scalpel because the government, to an extent, the government is it's a little bit overburdened. There's a little bit too much going on in the government, and the government does need to operate smaller and leaner. Now, that's going to hurt because smaller and leaner means you're getting rid of jobs, but with the national deficit and things the way they are currently, something has to be done. And whoever does that thing is essentially going to create a position for themselves where they'll probably never be truly appreciated in politics. So someone like Elon Musk is uniquely positioned because he doesn't ever have to hold a political position after this because of just the backlash of being responsible for potentially tens of thousands of jobs being axed from the federal government. So far, Doge has saved about $1,000 per taxpayer, about $130 billion so far in the first 100 days, which is interesting because when it's all said and done, it depends on what the end result is. The American people might actually be happy with this. I know Doge was set to self-destruct. It's only running for a limited amount of time, and in that time, they're going to try to restructure the government to work a lot leaner. That's what they're saying they're going to do. We're going to see what they're going to do. Let's go ahead and go to the next one. All right, so we have USAID. For those who don't know, USAID is basically a tool that the United States government uses to move taxpayer money around the world, for lack of a better term. So with the USAID, tens of billions of dollars annually, about $4 trillion total. The exact number is 3.75 trillion, and that's a rough estimate since World War II. Now that's important. World War II is basically the time America decided to start using aid as a foreign policy tool. And I would say that America, unlike any other nation, has been the most successful at using money as a foreign policy tool that they could accomplish more than if they would invade multiple nations. Because you have to remember, there are two concepts of America, and this is going to be important later. But there are two concepts of America politically. There are those who believe that America is America's interests, or America is the empire. And there are those who believe that America is the country first. So some people believe America first is what should take precedent. And some people believe that American interests should take precedent, even if the nation has to suffer. So that's something that's going to be running in the background the entire time. So also too, USAID, there's about 10,000 workers officially. Some say that this number is, there are others who work unofficially via the CIA, but that's something we'll discuss later as well. And so the goal via Doge is to shave this down to about 600 workers or less. So USAID is really being slimmed down. Let's go ahead and go to the next one. Now, Donald Trump had an executive order, and he basically described USAID as a threat to world peace. Now, you have to remember, Donald Trump, as you noted earlier, his faction of the Republican Party is something that I'll describe as Trumpism. The neoconservatives, like the Jeb Bushes, the George Bushes, the neocons. The neocons, to an extent, they put the American empire before the actual American country. So, for example, America might find itself in a war in Syria merely because there's something that occurs in Syria that threatens U.S. interest or threatens the empire or national security. All those words are the same concept. It just means it threatens America as the empire. But if you look at how U.S. aid is used, it's used more so as a weapon. And Donald Trump states and has stated that USAID is a threat to world peace. Under the Trumpism doctrine, it appears that they want to stop interference in other nations and focus solely on making America, or putting the country first. A lot of people don't understand when they say America first. It means that rather than prioritizing the American empire, what's prioritized is the American country. But U.S. foreign aid in 2024, you can see $6.1 billion given to the Ukraine and other nations. Of course, DRC has long been a recipient of U.S. foreign aid. But of course, and as a wise man said, whenever you receive something free, you're the product. I'll say that again. Anytime you receive something free, you're the product. So that's something to remember with aid. Let's go ahead and go to the next one. So we can see a quick breakdown of how things are sent out, and we can see some of it goes to education, educational institutions, foreign government spending, multilateral nonprofits. Some goes to, and the interesting thing is that some of these words are very vague. So what exactly is education? What is this money going to educate? Who's being educated? What are they being educated on? For so many billions of US dollars from taxpayers, hardworking people who get their payments taxed in order to provide these things. What exactly are these things going for? That's what we're going to talk about more. Let's go ahead and proceed next. Now, there's been some serious allegations about where this money is going. So there's a U.S. Congressman, Scott Perry, and it's been quoted that he's basically come on record and stated that millions of dollars have been sent to ISIS, Al Qaeda, Boko Haram, and all sorts of other terror adjacent groups directly from U.S. taxpayers. And also, too, some have come out to specifically say how USAID is funding Boko Haram in Nigeria. And there's a lot of these serious allegations being made. And the questions are, obviously, if someone is a terrorist, they're not above stealing or diverting funds. And so the question is, are all these millions intentionally being given, or are they being diverted? In either case, it's a security risk. The taxpayer money from America is going to fund terrorism, allegedly. And according to some of these U.S. congressmen, they're making these positions as one of the main reasons that if American money is somehow ending up in the hands of terrorists, then that money needs to be seriously reviewed and vetted as to how it's happening, or somebody's intentionally doing it. Let's go ahead and go to the next slide. Now, also, too, you had people actually on ground, investigative journalists, one of the few investigative journalists in Nigeria. Initially, some of these people came out, and for years, people have been saying that USAID has been funding terrorist activities in Nigeria. And it's interesting that when a lot of these guys were saying those things, sometimes they would just be, people would say, oh, this guy's just making it up. There's no way American taxpayer money is funding terrorism in Nigeria. What does America have to gain by destabilizing Nigeria? But it's interesting that people like Elon Musk have come out to say that USAID has been used to destabilize African countries. And then we have these stories, and in hindsight, it's like, wait a minute. When these people were saying these things, it actually sounded crazy that the United States would be funding Boko Haram. But now that certain documentation is coming to light, it's a really interesting situation that you have money that's coming from U.S. taxpayers, unfortunately, and allegedly going into the hands of terrorists. Let's go ahead and go to the next one. So there's also been further revelations that the Taliban at one point was receiving $40 million a week from USAID, that the money that was being sent out there was somehow ending up in the hands of terrorists and the Taliban. Once again, you have to kind of look at these things and ask, is this intentional, or is this, who and why would they be funding terrorists, and who greenlit this? And if somebody didn't greenlit it, who was negligent enough to allow millions and millions and millions of dollars into the hands of terrorists? Let's go to the next slide. Now, of course, not the USAID isn't completely bad. There are good sides, but you have to remember the history of the USAID, and we will get into that. Some allege that it's being used as a weapon, and any wise nation that wants to use a weapon, and the best weapons are the weapons that are, how would I put this? The best poison is poison that's sweet to the taste. The best poison is poison that makes you feel good on the front end, but robs you on the back end. Because by the time the person realizes that they've been poisoned, it's too late. It's already in effect. And if indeed that the allegations are true and aid has been used or is being used as a weapon, you don't want a weapon to be outright dangerous. You want a weapon to be implicitly dangerous, meaning that the person doesn't realize the danger that they've walked into until they've fully immersed themselves into the situation. But however, USAID does have a dual legacy. There have been very good things that the USAID have done in the past. But then again, there are classified documents that show that aid money has been used as the quote unquote invisible hand in a lot of situations. Let's go ahead and go to the next one. Here's something interesting too, is that USAID, certain NGOs and journalists, USAID has been paying journalists on the continent to push certain narratives. It's interesting because it makes one wonder, why are journalists being sponsored by U.S. taxpayer money? And some of the activities include attacks on organic crop farming in favor of GMOs. So you have a lot of stories right now about how GMOs would actually help and benefit Africa. I'd say about 99% of the produce in Africa is organic. And in a time where the world seems to be pushing for organic to reverse to go back to organic, there's a lot of journalists coming out saying that Africans need to embrace GMO. And the problem with a lot of these GMOs is once you use them, they don't regenerate themselves. So every harvest, you can't take the seeds off the crops and just put them in the ground and grow them. You have to purchase new crops. So something like seeds that they can continually be used as a self-sustaining method of farming, you now become a customer. So in order to grow your corn, your cassava, or whatever you're growing, you would need to repurchase almost like a subscription to farming, which is interesting. Also, too, one of the things that came up is that in around 2017, 2018, there were journalists in Africa who were actually paid to attack Pan-Africanism, which is interesting. Around that same time period, it's almost like Pan-Africanism became a dirty word. A lot of people don't understand what Pan-Africanism means. It's not a group. It's not a club. It's merely an understanding that people of a certain diaspora have to understand and be on code with each other and focus on obtaining power for the entire group. Because other groups play as a group, as a team, if you will. Doesn't mean that your identity is subsumed or you give up your identity in any form. No, it just means that you recognize that you're playing on the same team and there are other teams and you're playing for the name on the front of your jersey, let's say the Kansas City Chiefs, and not necessarily the name on the back of your jersey. But at the same time, just because you're a member of the Kansas City Chiefs doesn't mean that you give up your identity entirely. But it's interesting that if you look at that date, you also realize that there were some content creators in America that were seemingly on code with the Pan-Africanist movement. And around that time, it's like they kind of shifted and started attacking Pan-Africanism. Now, there's no direct evidence that these people were funded by anything like that, but it's just an interesting correlation that you have USAID allegedly giving money to journalists to fight things like GMOs and Pan-Africanism. You have to ask, what's the fear in Pan-Africanism, especially if Pan-Europeanism is what made the Europeans so successful. And you see that through the Marshall Plan. Even now, you see someone like Elon Musk, who is a descendant of a European, from a different lineage, working with Donald Trump, who is a descendant of a European, who are both now finding themselves in America. And they're working lockstep. They're not worrying about the differences. They're worrying about obtaining power and maintaining it. It's a very interesting synergy. I wish the diaspora would view these things and understand these things a little bit better, because the game is about power, and those that get it will get it. Those that don't will never, unless they change their mentalities. But that's another topic all in itself. It's an interesting topic. Let's go to the next one. Now, another issue is that, for example, we talked about healthcare. So when we discuss healthcare, we have to ask, that's a broad term. And me, I always like to understand the definition of words, because words have power and they also have a definition. And if we're not careful, people can shift the definition. And then from there, they can use words to confuse you. And you have to remember that once someone's confusing you, they've declared war on you. Warfare is essentially deception. It starts at deception. If I tell you that I'm your ally and I'm not, I've declared war on you. If I tell you that I'm going to go to war with you and I plan to stab you in the back as soon as you get into the heat of battle, I've declared war on you from that position. Now, you might not realize that I've declared war on you, but I have. But when we look at things like healthcare, and billions of dollars are being funded into healthcare, and then we look at a certain situation where poor people are dying of malaria and very curable diseases, and then you have millions of dollars poured into what they call healthcare, and that includes deleting fetuses before they're born. You have to ask, like, why is millions of dollars being pushed into this and it's being called healthcare in the same country where poor people are dying of malaria and very curable diseases? What's the obsession with this? Also, too, it's almost as if a lot of these NGOs and a lot of this money, it's been alleged, has been used to fuel like a gender war, if you will, that was never even present in these countries. They now come along and say, well, here's what we're going to push. We're going to push these things. And it's like, man, if you've ever been to the African continent, you've actually done some good work, you understand that these are at the very bottom of the list in regards to what we would call healthcare. So a lot of people, for example, need blood pressure medication. They don't necessarily check their blood pressure like they should. And a lot of people are stressed, you know. But let's go ahead and go to the next one. Now, we have to remember that Africa is going to be the world's engine, if you will. And because it's going to be the world's engine, it's going to be where most of the people in the world are going to be. So when a lot of Africans look and say, man, they're pouring money into getting rid of the population rather than actually putting money into healthcare that can potentially save the population and help them continue to grow, a lot of people start looking at it as if there are enemies coming in as a Trojan horse or as friends. Let's go to the next slide. Now, also, too, there's been allegations that USAID money has been used to affect local elections and shift sentiments of the population. Elon Musk made statements similar to this. Now, if we just take Nigeria as an example, there was a time when, and of course, if you don't know, Boko Haram was allegedly being funded by the USAID. At the same time, you had the Barack Obama administration, the Obama administration, who their faction, they definitely believed in America more so as the empire rather than the country, meaning that if one had to suffer, because you can only be good at one thing at a time. That's what a lot of people don't understand. You can be great in you can be good in a lot of things, but you can only be great at one thing. So like an athlete, for example, may be a great scorer. You know, you're pretty good at defense, but you really are remembered for one thing. Like Dennis Rodman was remembered for his rebounding abilities. He was maybe 6'9", 6'10", and was out rebounding 7-footers. And in that era he played against some of the great big men, the 4s and the 5s of our era. And he was known for his doggedness in grabbing those rebounds. So now we look at the Barack Obama mentality, which is still controlling his faction up until very recently, I believe. With the defeat of Kamala Harris, I see the Barack Obama faction no longer controlling the Democratic Party. Barack Obama, he was the Democratic Party. His disciples or his lineage essentially controlled the Democrats up until the loss of Kamala. Now you might see AOC or the Bernie faction take over, and they go slightly a little bit towards Marxism, socialism, more towards that slant, less interventionist. But the Obama-led administration, they were interventionists. They believed in America as the empire rather than America as the nation first. So they wanted the empire to be great, even if the American nation has to suffer. So remember, there's America is the concept of America, which is the empire, and then America is the country. Some factions put the American empire and say if one has to suffer, it let the American country suffer in order to maintain the empire. And you got to remember, the empire is made up of a series of systems: a global military order, which was built on the back of NATO and the US's Blue Water Navy. A world economic order, which was based on the World Trade Organization, America using its deep water navy to facilitate trade, the World Trade Organization, the IMF, and the World Bank. Those were essentially the pillars of the American economic order, and they still are. And then the World Monetary Order, backed up by the US dollar. So those three things create the American empire. And so Barack Obama was heavily involved with the American empire and maintaining the empire. That's why when he was in office, America was constantly fighting themselves and other nations. So during the time when Goodluck Jonathan was in office, Boko Haram was being allegedly funded by United States taxpayers at the same time when Barack Obama withheld arms, and somehow sophisticated weaponry was finding itself in the hands of these terrorists, while the government was essentially being outgunned because they were being blocked from purchasing weapons unless they changed certain laws in regards to cultural practices and they embraced certain lifestyles that the Africans simply weren't into. So it looks interesting because and also two factions were sponsored by NGOs to protest against his government, even though in regards to the last three presidents of Nigeria, he was the best president in regards to Muhammadu Buhari, currently Tinubu. He was honestly the last prolific president in regards to progress, just based on the numbers. Let's go ahead and go to the next slide. So if we look at it, and that's just not my opinion, of course, if we look at it during 2002 under the Obasanjo administration, Nigeria grew at 15%. Yar'Adua, his greatest, was 8%. Good luck, 9%. And then it was almost as if this trajectory was sabotaged. And since then, Nigeria has really become stagnant under the leadership that was supported by the United States. So some people allege that the United States interfering with Nigeria's election, allegedly, in a way, put the nation on a backward trajectory. But these are just allegations. But if we look at the numbers, it's very interesting. Let's go ahead and go to the next slide. Now, this is something that a lot of people don't understand. A lot of people don't understand geopolitics. Geopolitics, you have to remember, it's geography and politics. There's two words there, geography and politics. Now, for some reason, people think that Russia is just some bully that always wants to invade Europe. Now, this is Russia's full expanse up until 1989, until the Russian Empire collapsed. Similar to how America has an empire, Russia had an empire. And Russia was the land power. America is the sea power. And there's an amazing book by Alexander de Gun. He's a Russian geopolitical analyst. His book is like the Bible in regards to strategists in certain sections. And this is something that, this is the situation. This is one of the first situations that America used aid as a weapon. So now let's go to the next slide and we'll understand this a little bit better. And remember this map in your head. So now, if you look at the orange area is called the Great European Plain. Now, in a nutshell, this is the easiest land in Europe to invade because there are no mountain ranges. There's nothing. It's literally flat land. Now, flat land is terrible. It makes a terrible border. Because you can just roll tanks over flat land. So if I have 100,000 tanks in Germany and I want to invade Poland, there's very little to stop me. It's almost as if, imagine America and Canada became sworn enemies and Canada wanted to invade America with 100,000 tanks. It would be very easy. You just put them on the highway and drive them right into the country. There's a long border. It's a flat border. It's very difficult to defend. However, fortunately for America, Canada would probably never ever dream of invading the United States. But if under some strange scenario they did, it would be a very difficult time. So now if you look at the Great European Plain, we understand how Napoleon and later Adolf Hitler were so successful in invading and taking large swaths of land because Napoleon moved fast and quick. Hitler moved with something called the Blitzkrieg, meaning we're just going to move quick and take a lot of territory. So when you look up, we have so many troops in your country that you don't even know what's going on. So the Great European Plain, it's the most difficult terrain to defend in Europe. And if you look who has the most of it, it's Russia. So that's why if you look at after World War II, Russia, or during World War II, if you look at the Russian-German non-aggression pact, Russia anchored itself and split Poland with Germany so that it can move all of its troops to Poland because it's a smaller area and there's a mountain range that runs from Romania all the way through France that essentially creates a border. And if there's a mountain range, you can't just drive troops over a mountain range. That makes it very difficult. It's very difficult to climb a mountain just to go fight. And you have to remember, that's what messed up Hannibal Barca, is that when he came to invade Rome, he came from the Alps, and the Alps defeated him. So terrain can defeat soldiers. By the time his troops got to Rome, they were so emaciated that they put up a good fight. But had they been able to just roll elephants into Rome, they would have had an amazing time and probably would have crushed the Roman Empire. So geopolitically, Russia is stuck because they have to close the gap and push and anchor themselves as much against Poland or even take over Poland as they could. But if you look at Russia's long-term ambitions prior to America and the Marshall Plan, which we'll get into soon, Russia was going to take over all the way to France because they wanted to control the entire Great European Plain, because Russia understood that it dealt with Napoleon It dealt with Hitler, and it couldn't deal with another group invading or sending troops into the great European plain because all of the fighting was in Russia. But luckily, Russia has a very harsh winter. And what Russia does, the Russian troops retreat behind the Ural Mountains. Let's go ahead and go to the next one. So now, America wasn't always a superpower. It essentially had to grow up. So it created a system made up of a set of systems that propped up its world order. But America, for a long time, was an isolationist nation. America, and in fact, if you think about it, Great Britain decided America wasn't worth the hassle because it was costing Great Britain more money to fight America than the colonies were even bringing to Great Britain. So Great Britain said, you know what, we're going to leave you guys alone. You're not ever going to be anything. You're some random nation all the way on the other side of the world, and you have no effect on Europe. And for a long time, that was true. America wasn't a factor in regards to the great European powers. It was always like their American cousins. They were viewed almost like how the Australians are viewed. Yeah, you're descendants of Europeans, but you really have no effect on Europe. So America was initially an isolationist nation because it had two oceans that separated it. And this is something that Donald Trump is highlighting. And it's almost as if he wants to move back to an isolationist position because his faction of Trumpism is more so America hands off from the world. When they say America first, they mean that they're not really focusing on quote unquote American interests, national security from an external position. They're looking at national security from an internal position, meaning they want to know everybody who's inside of the country, meaning that if you've committed a crime and you're undocumented, they want to send you back to where you came from. That's more so their focus. Their focus is on America as the country, not America as a concept. So if the focus is on America as a concept, this is when we find situations where America may go to war with Libya, may go to war with Syria, may go to war with Burkina Faso. However, when you have an administration that's looking at America as the country, now there's still going to be warfare, but it's going to be economic warfare to tilt the scales back in the favor of America and domestic production. So America, of course, is now at the point where it can decide whether or not it wants to be an interventionist or an isolationist. Let's go ahead and go to the next slide. Now, if we remember what I talked about in Russia's geopolitical reality, Russia needs to take over the entire great European plain in order to keep itself safe. That's just the reality. It's not as if Russia is just this bully that wants to grab land. That's a very simplistic position for the people who don't necessarily understand the real geopolitical realities as to why Russia, for their very existence, has to control and dominate the great European plain, because at any time it's completely susceptible to invasion because it occupies the greatest percentage of the most easily invadable land. It's almost like you're playing Risk, and that's just the position that you have to play. So America understood that. And you have to remember that after World War II, America had nukes in Russia. They also got nukes. So America realized, wait a minute, we both have nukes. We just used ours on Japan. And there's really no laws or rules that say we shouldn't use nukes. So what America did is America said, what we'll do is we'll prop up the Western nations in order to create a wall against the Soviets completely dominating Europe, because the Soviets could have. So what American taxpayer money did, and this is something, there's really been no plan to repay this money, which it should be repaid because it wasn't a gift. It was more so of a loan, in my opinion. But in today's money, it'd be about $178 billion that was used as aid money to fight the Soviet Union, because the United States realized that World War II just ended. Nobody wants a long, protracted ground war. And not only that, Russia has nukes. Nobody wants to have Washington, D.C. or New York wiped off the map. So what happened is that America used aid as a weapon against the Soviet Union during the Marshall Plan. And also, too, an important thing to note is that as much as people stress American taxpayer money being used, a lot of mineral wealth taken from Africa was used to rebuild Europe as well. A lot of ill-gotten goods from former colonies were used as well. And that's going to play a factor in later. But let's go ahead and proceed to the next one. So the 4-point plan. All right, now let's talk about the Marshall Plan. The Marshall Plan was successful because it created nations that were strong enough to stop the spread of the Soviet Union, because the Soviet Union ideally would have liked to have taken France. Now, they ended up taking East Germany. They would have loved to have taken West Germany, and they would have also loved to have taken and controlled France and had France as a puppet state, because at that point they would have consolidated their entire hold in the great European plain, which permanently would have protected the Russian heartland from invasions, because you dominate the entire plain. Similar to how America wanted to go from sea to shining sea, manifest destiny. Because imagine if another nation or a hostile nation would have taken over California, Nevada, New Mexico, Arizona, Washington State, Utah. That would have created a situation where America was permanently in a position where they had a hostile nation that they had to share a lot of space with. That was the situation Russia was trying to avoid. But with Truman was the one who took aid worldwide. He realized and said, look, we didn't have to fight the Soviet Union. We didn't have to lift up a gun to shoot any Soviets, but we were able to stop them in their tracks with aid. So now you had the 4-point plan, and what Truman did is Truman took the show on the road all over the world, and he opened up nations in Africa, Ethiopia, Egypt, Libya, nations in South America. And now this was the era where you saw the South American strongman getting backed up by the United States, even if they didn't necessarily practice true democracy. As long as they could become a strong nation that could resist the urge or the influence from the Soviet Union, the American government was taking taxpayer money and using aid as an incentive to have them completely turn their backs on the Soviets. So the Soviets were getting the door slammed in their face in many of these nations merely because of the aid that America was giving. And now this is the first time we see America say, you know what, let's take this aid show on the road and see what we can do with it globally. Let's go to the next one. Now, people credit Harry Truman as the one who refined the weaponization of aid and the current form in which America used aid. And at first, Harry Truman's foreign policy was questioned. A lot of people didn't believe it, but Harry Truman said that he's going to use aid to create peace. Now, it's interesting because now you have Donald Trump coming along and saying aid has now been used to destabilize peace, and it's a prevention from peace. So it's interesting how this was pitched to the U.S. people as peace. Let's go ahead and go to the next slide. Now, initially, it was a fight for the American people to accept that millions and billions of dollars of their money were being sent over to nations in order to prevent them from falling into the hands of communists. And a lot of people criticized the policy, but true enough, it actually was a very convenient tool because you didn't have to send troops into battle. You could use money. You can use your money to do a lot of work for you. Money is like a force multiplier. If I'm rich, I can use money to do things for me and that's the definition of being wealthy, is that you can use your money to do things for you and it frees up your time. So let's go ahead and go to the next one. Now, the issue with Harry Truman, he used aid in a very elementary way. There were too many bodies, there was too much bureaucracy. It wasn't centralized. When Kennedy came along, he centralized it. He said, I'm going to create an agency specifically that focuses on aid and using money as a tool. So Kennedy is where we see the emergence of USAID. Let's go and go to the next one. Now we see USAID, which initially started with, well, we see USAID generally, the term, not the organization or the independent agency, started as something that was used to rebuild Europe in order to prevent Russia from completely taking over the entire European plain as it desired. We saw under Truman said, let's take this show on the road globally. And then we saw Kennedy now really ramping it up and saying this is going to be a key piece of U.S. foreign policy. And it was rather successful. It shaped the trajectory of the world. Instead of having to completely have wars in anywhere that you wanted to have influence, instead of having to overthrow governments, you could go into nations with maybe $100 million and maybe $200 million, and you could potentially have a whole government overthrown. It was just a lot cleaner that way than having to send American troops in to literally take people out like Pablo Escobar. That wasn't the way. So under Kennedy, the USAID was refined. Now remember that just because there's allegations that USAID was used as a tool, and in a lot of instances it was used as a tool, the extent isn't truly known. A lot of information is classified under this category. But USAID, there are good things that it does, verifiably. But there are a lot of things that people have problems with. So for example, let's go ahead and go to the next one. Now, some have alleged within the Trumpism faction that the USAID has been used as a tool of the CIA in order to destabilize nations, and it creates more problems than it's worth because it's creating more problems for America to have to clean up later. And there may be some validity to this. So, for example, if you think about the interventions in Libya and removing Gaddafi, so I like the metaphor, the example that it's like a hornet's nest. Now, if there's a hornet's nest and you just leave it alone, yeah, there's hornets in that nest, but it's probably not going to be a problem unless you go ahead and kick it over and knock it over, and then all of a sudden now all of the hornets are out. So some are alleging that the CIA is basically going around kicking hornets' nests, because when you remove a figure like Gaddafi, if you look at what's going on in the Sahel currently with all the free flow of weapons and human trafficking and everything that came as a result, having Gaddafi there doesn't seem so bad. Gaddafi with his faults and all. But another interesting thing to bring up is if the allegations are true that the deep state or the CIA is using USAID in nefarious ways or in ways that cause trouble, you have to ask yourself, does this administration really want to have issues with the CIA? Because you can put somebody as the head of an agency, but if the people under that head, and you have to remember the head is maybe one or two people inside of an organization of how many thousands of people, you might put somebody at the head, but that doesn't mean that you're controlling the body. That doesn't mean that you're controlling the systems in the organization. That doesn't mean that you're necessarily running the organization. You're just the figurehead. And it's going to be interesting to see the dynamic between the CIA, and if the USAID is such an effective tool as it is touted to be, then removing that tool from the arsenal of the CIA will wonder how that shapes up in the future. Let's go ahead and go to the next one. Now, if we look at it, we look at just the map, and we see how aid was used to contain the Soviet Union, and it was actually used quite successfully. So that's another issue, is that, okay, with the next potential threat, maybe coming from China or another nation, but most likely China, if you want to subscribe to that, where does that put America if you're taking away this tool that seems so successful in preventing the spread of the Soviet Union? That's another question that we're going to see how it plays out. Let's go ahead and go to the next one. Now, going back to Africa, we see how there were.
Hey, if I can interject real quick, guys, thank you for joining, everyone. Please hit that like button. If you have not hit the like button yet, go ahead and hit that like button. I greatly appreciate it. All right, go ahead, Ebube.
All right. So yeah, if you haven't hit that like button, go ahead and hit that like button too. Also, go ahead and if you haven't subscribed, make sure you're subscribed here. I keep independent media alive and kicking and well, because you might not get all this in one place. You get so much from this channel. This is a great channel. Dynasty has done a lot, and the only thing he's asking for is a like. So I'd say give him a like, and after this video is over, go back to some of his other videos and just like those too. But back to Africa and how the alleged CIA involvement. There's been whispers in regards to the CIA's involvement in what happened in Congo. And let's go ahead and go to the next one. And then after a prolific leader was taken out, we see that in Africa, to an extent, there was the emergence of a dictator class that was propped up by Western money. And one of the relics of this was Mobutu. And he, I believe, $12 billion over the course of the time that he was there. And what he would do is he would act as almost as a staging ground for Western powers for whatever they needed to do in Africa. And also, too, he was there as a strong central figure to prevent the spread of communism. But at the same time, if such figures are being worked with and they have gross human rights violations, the question now has to be, are we keeping monsters in power merely to maintain interest? So that's another question that we can explore, but we'll explore that a little bit later. But let's go ahead and go to the next one. So here, once again, we see where there's different spending, right? We see where military aid is going. We see Israel, Afghanistan, Egypt, Iraq. We see 5 countries that received over 30% of all U.S. foreign aid since World War II. We see Israel, we see Egypt, Afghanistan, of course. And so when we look at this, we see that there's a lot of money going to a lot of places, but then when we look at some of the results or some of the accountability, we don't actually know how this money is being spent. And part of the problem when you don't have strong oversight is that when you're sending billions of dollars to Afghanistan and hundreds of millions of dollars are ending up in the hands of terrorists, we now have to ask ourselves, is this truly an effective, are we doing this in the most effective manner? Because if you're sending billions of dollars over and hundreds of millions of dollars are ending up in the hands, if not billions of dollars ending up in the hands of the nation's stated enemies, well, then what are we really doing? Let's go ahead and go to the next one. Now, this is the bigger question, is that as the Trump ideology comes in, and of course the Trump ideology, it's almost like a non-interventionist ideology. I would say had those who supported interventionism and viewed America as the empire first, rather than America as the country first, we'd probably be seeing people gearing up to invade Burkina Faso, Mali, Niger. But the real question is, why do these African nations need aid to begin with? So, for example, Niger, under their France-Afrique arrangement, they received about $1 billion a year from their uranium, like 1.3, 1.2. But the crazy thing is, now that they've gotten rid of some of those agreements with France, they're making $1 billion a day from their uranium. And that's just one resource. So African nations don't necessarily need any aid from anybody. What African nations need are to, if they're in a position, so for example, Nigeria is in a position where they get most of the money from most of their resources. But some African nations don't get most of the money from most of their resources. Rather than seeking aid, and if you look at the aid that goes towards education, infrastructure, gaps in government services, human rights, and environmental issues, you're not really seeing much improvement in those areas. So either the aid isn't working or the aid isn't reaching the people. Now, what some of these African nations should really be focusing on more than getting aid is merely getting the most from their resources. Because if they did that, they wouldn't need any aid. So, for example, Niger went from making $1 billion a year off of one of its resources, and it has dozens of resources, to making $1 billion a day. Now, that wasn't easy. It took a complete change of government. It took them standing with other nations to say, if you try to militarily invade, well, these other nations will stand up. And generally, what we should have seen in Africa is Africa coming together to protect African interests instead of African nations fighting as individual nations. There should have been African nations understanding that there's an African agenda, and anything that benefits Africans on the continent or on the diaspora is what should be explored and what should be pushed for as a group, which is the definition of Pan-Africanism. It's working together with your group to attain power. But as we saw, of course, that's why you might have journalists who speak against these things, because maybe certain status quos and certain factions want status quos to remain the same way. But that's it right there in regards to how some have alleged that USAID has been fueling corruption and destabilization in Africa regarding the statements made by Elon Musk and Donald Trump.
All right, I'll go ahead and put the link in the chat room, guys. If you want to call in and add to the convo, if you got any questions, please call in again. Link is in the chat room. Please click on that link, add to the conversation. Also, make sure you hit that like button. And Ebube, shout out your page so people could go make sure we get people subscribed to your page.
Well, first, if you don't know, you got the Okoli Law Group, 678-467-0810. We're here based in the Atlanta area. We focus on criminal defense. Hopefully you never get in any trouble. I pray you never do. The justice system is
right.
And there's no real winners. Just getting your freedom back, that's not really a win because you started out with it. So hopefully you never have to call me. Trust me, I have enough clients. But if you ever do, you ever get in any issues in the Atlanta area, go ahead and give us a call. And Dynas, once again, I'm gonna send you this mug. I'm gonna bring it by. I haven't been by your place in quite some time, so I gotta come see. I got it for you ready. But yeah. So also to okolilaw.com, email attorney@okolilaw.com. But yeah, so that is where we're at in regards to USAID and the Trump faction of the Republican Party, focusing on America as the country rather than America as the empire. And we're going to see how that plays out for Africa.
You think that's a win for Africa?
Depends on how Africa plays it.
Now,
Africa could say, you know what? If all the allegations were true, let's just say that because allegations, either they're true or they're not. And we don't know if they're all true, but we do have examples in history that we can look back and say, well, this was true. And we see how aid was used in the past. And then we see the allegations made by certain senators. So let's say if we just take these as true and we say, okay, if Elon Musk is correct, if Donald Trump is correct, and aid money was used to destabilize world peace and destabilize countries in Africa, well, if you remove that factor that destabilizes countries in Africa, well, then it puts a lot more of the control in your hands. Now, if you're a bad administrator and you don't know how to run a country and you're just there to embezzle money, that just means that you're just going to have free hand to do what you wanted to do to begin with. But once again, it all goes back to the African nations. I believe you get the leadership that you deserve. I believe you get what you deserve in this life. I believe that if you allow yourself to have leaders that rob the people and mismanage everything, and it's in your face and it's blatant and it's obvious, I believe that that's what you deserve. So it's up to the African nations to see what they'll accept from their leaders.
All right, guys, links in the chat room if you want to call in and add to the conversation. If not, we'll go ahead and close out. I say, what's going on? What do you you're here in Atlanta with me, Ebube. What are your thoughts on all the protests recently? Have you got any thoughts on that?
Which ones in particular? Because it seems like everybody's protesting everything nowadays.
Well, the ones that were just on this Saturday, the 5th, the hands off protests.
Hands off. I'm not following.
Yeah, it was basically protests against Elon Musk and Donald Trump. They called it hands off.
Okay. I mean, well, the thing is, you have to ask yourself, if we have a national deficit, there's national debt, and someone's saying that, hey, look, we're going to try and reduce this, and we're going to try and reduce government spending, and we're going to try and reduce corruption in government spending. if those people are sincere in what they're doing, those are all great things. We should reduce corruption in government. We should reduce unnecessary spending. We shouldn't have taxpayers spending money on things that we don't need money to be spent on. And certain things that I've read about, I'm like, well, why are we spending hundreds of millions of dollars on, certain things that I find are ridiculous that I'm just not going to say here. And you have to remember that the faction of people who state that they cared about the environment typically lean more left. And the group of people who went out of their ways to purchase electric vehicles typically leaned left. So if I've heard of situations where people who drive Teslas are being targeted, but a lot of the people that drive Teslas are on the left.
Right.
So, and, what's the point of that? And what's the point of destroying someone's personal property because you don't like someone who owns a certain percentage of that company? I don't believe anybody should destroy anybody's property. If you don't want to buy a Tesla, don't buy one. Don't buy one, But at the end of the day, I think that things have just become so divided because there's intentional narratives being pushed to cause division that people are upset and they don't quite know what they're upset about. It's almost like the P. Diddy situation. Brother Love, Puff Daddy, Sean Combs.
Love.
Not sure nowadays. Free Puff. But you ask people, okay, so what was he charged with? Most people won't know. They'll say, well, I don't know. And I say, well, what did he do? Well, he did it. And they're like, well, what did he do? What is he even being charged with? Because if someone is demonized long enough, it doesn't matter what they've done. It's about the demonization process. So if someone tells me not to like somebody, I'm going to think whether or not I should like the person or dislike the person and what grounds under which this person is making that assertion. Because we pay our tuition separately is my statement. Meaning that my thoughts and my beliefs don't have to gel with your thoughts and your beliefs merely because you believe them strongly. I have to agree with what your position is. But most people don't really think in that direction. They say, well, this person's bad, this person's good. But there's nuance and, make up your own mind. But if you want to protest, I would say if you think Elon Musk is doing something bad, then don't buy a Tesla. Don't go out and destroy someone else's property. Just don't buy a Tesla. Don't support him. It's that simple.
Listen, guys, again, links in the chat room. If you want to call in, go in and call in. If not, we'll close out. What else is going on? You have that. Another topic is USAID. But now people who are upset that USAID is, that Musk and Trump, they're putting a leash on, and Rubio, they're putting a leash on USAID. People are upset and say, hey, there's vulnerable people that are now not getting these services. That's mean, and you're heartless. What would be your response to that?
Well, I would say that we need to really take a look at where money is being spent. Based on what's come out, there's a lot of money being spent in ways that most people wouldn't agree with, that aren't going to meet the mark. Now, remember health. If billions of dollars are spent in health, and for example, maybe the health care is paying for money for people to have gender change operations in DRC. And it's like, man, there's a lot of other areas of health that should probably be prioritized. So if someone's saying, well, that money is going to be scrapped, well, you ask, well, how effective was that money to begin with? Where was it being spent? When we say health, where is that money being spent? Is it being spent on gender reassignment surgeries in DRC? Or is it being spent to make sure that no one's suffering from polio in this century? Or is it being spent to make sure that measles, mumps, and rubella isn't popping up? I mean, what is it being spent on? So I would say we need more we need more scrutiny, because taxpayer money shouldn't just be spent willy-nilly. And if it is going to be spent towards things like health, education, I personally think that education should be just skills based. If it's going to be spent anywhere in the third world, and it shouldn't come with certain strings on certain lifestyles and different things and traditions that may not be conducive to Western perceptions. I would say we have to respect African traditions if we're going to do anything in regards to that.
Right, guys. Links in the chat room. If you want to call in, call in. If not, we'll go in and close out. This is the. I see a lot of people have opinions in the chat room, but don't want to call in. So we'll wait.
It's a heavy topic,
So So Ebube, what's the next documentary?
Oh man, I got I'm going into trial this week. Actually, I got a RICO case. It's probably gonna take, depending on how it goes, I might be in there for a couple weeks, maybe a couple months, but hopefully everything goes well. Like I said, those RICO cases are difficult because you have so many moving parts, so much evidence to go through. It's like being in the playoffs. So once those are over, I'll be able to, put my hand in some other things.
All right, well, shoot, we'll go ahead and close out. Hey, everyone, thank you so much for joining. Make sure you like, share, subscribe. Till next time, family. Dynasty Mirror, search for Huru. Peace.